Okay, so we are at section 10.7, which is interpreting the discriminant. And the discriminant is a very important part of the quadratic formula. As you can see, our quadratic formula is written right here, which we talked about in 10.6. And the discriminant is the stuff that is inside the square root, the b squared minus 4ac. And what makes it so important is it tells us the number of real solutions that are in the quadratic equation. So let's scroll down. And this chart here tells us if we're given, say we're given a value for our b squared minus 4ac that's less than 0. So say that I'm given a value, for example, is like -8. If we look into our quadratic equation, if -8 ended up being the result here, we can't take the square root of a negative number. So number of solutions we would have is we would have 0 solutions or no solutions. The number of x-intercepts, well, if we have no solutions for x-intercepts, we have no values for x. So that means we have 0 x-intercepts. And an example of this on a graph would look something like this, where say if our A was positive and it was going in an upward direction, it looks something like this, and the vertex wouldn't quite cross the x-axis, and there I'm highlighting where the vertex would be located. And that would be a graph that would have a negative number in our discriminant. The second chart is what if the value of bx squared minus 4ac would equal 0? This means that we're only going to be given one solution. And if we're only given one solution for that, that means that there's going to be only one x-intercept. And from what we learned in previous sections here in chapter 10, if we only have one x-intercept, that means that our x-intercept is also the vertex. So I'm just going to write down here vertex. And an example of this on the graph would be like something like this. And it would land right on the x-axis. So the vertex would be right on the x-axis. For the last one, it would be b squared minus 4ac would be greater than 0, which means is that it's a positive. So say, it's like 16 or something. And because it's positive, we can take the square root of a positive value, and that means we would be given two solutions. Because by using the quadratic equation, we get the plus and minus, so we'd have the negative b plus whatever the discriminant would be divided by 2a, and then negative b minus the square root of the discriminant all over 2a. So that's where we get two solutions from. So if we have two solutions with our value, that means we would also get two x-intercepts. And the example of that would be something that would cross the x-axis twice. Just like this graph here, where it would cross here at the x-axis, and it would also cross here at the x-axis. So for this section, what they're concerned about is all they want you to do is use the discriminant to find how many solutions there are for each equation. So let's look at these examples. So if I look at example A, first thing I need to do is solve for the discriminant. So I write down b squared minus 4ac, which is my discriminant. So here I have my b is 4, so b squared is 16, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c, that is 3. So we have 16 minus, so let's see here, what's 3 times 1 is 3, and 3 times 4 is 12. And 16 minus 12 gives me 4, which if we look at our chart up here, we have a positive number, so that means that it's going to have 2 solutions. And so, yeah, that's all we have to solve for, is we're just going to have 2 solutions. So for B, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to solve for the discriminant, which, let's see, here is 25 minus 4 times 2 times 6. So I have 25 minus 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 4 is 48. 25 minus 48 gives me a negative 23. So with a negative 23, this means that this is less than 0. So if it's less than 0, that means I'm going to have either 0 or no solutions. Let's look at C. So first off, let's put it in ax squared plus bx plus c form. So I'm going to move that 1 to the left side of the equal sign. So it gives me a negative x squared plus 2x minus 1 equals 0. Now that I have it in this form, I can use the discriminant to see how many solutions I can have. So b squared would be 4 minus 4 times a, which is negative 1, and c, which is negative 1. So I have 4 minus, so negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. 1 times 4 is 4. And so I have 4 minus 4, that equals 0. And so if it's 0, that means that we're only going to be given one solution, which that solution will be on the vertex. Okay, in these examples, they're asking us to state whether the vertex is above the x-axis, below the x-axis, or on the x-axis. So that initially may sound complex, but if we go through the steps, it really isn't that bad. First step that I want you to do is I want you to answer the discriminant. Give an answer for the discriminant. Okay, so let's look at A. So let's use our b squared minus 4ac and find the answer of the discriminant. So here we have 36 minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 20. So I got 36 minus, so 20 times negative 20 times a negative 1 is 20. 20 times 4 is 80. So 36 minus 80 gives me a negative 44. And I know that since it's less than 0, that I'm going to have no solutions. So that means that for this particular equation, it doesn't cross the x-axis at all. So second step is you must find out if your A is positive or negative. And here our A is negative 1. So our A here equals negative 1. Excuse me. And we learned in previous sections that if our A is negative, that our graph will have a downward approach, something like this. And if our A is positive, it'll have an upward direction like this. So since our A is negative, we know that it's going to look something sort of like this. So last step is I want you to make a small graph, and you can determine where the vertex is located. So I'm just going to make a little graph right here. It doesn't have to be anything special. So you know that it's going to have no solution, so it's not going to cross the x-axis at all. But you're also aware of that it's going to be a downward direction, so it will look something kind of like this. As you can see, it's in a, because A is negative, it's in a downward direction. We found in the discriminant that it has no solution, so it doesn't cross the x-axis. So here's our vertex, and we can conclude that the vertex is below the x-axis. Let's try B. So keep these in mind. And let's do step 1. Let's answer the discriminant. So we have B squared, which is 26 squared, and 26 squared ends up being 676 minus 4 times a negative 1 times a negative 169. So negative 169 times a negative 1 is a positive 169. 169 times 4 ends up being 676, so it's 676 minus a 676, which that equals 0. So we know that it's only has one solution. And we realize that our A equals a negative 1, so we know that it's going to be in a downward direction. And so, but in this case, it really didn't matter if A was positive or negative, because since there's only one solution, our vertex is on the x-axis. So we can, because we only have one solution, we can conclude that it is on the x-axis. And that's section 10.7. So I hope this helped. And until next time.